let me get started with the introduction of, before I go into the interaction of the speakers, let me briefly start with, this is day 2 of the Divershefy Club launch event of the International Speaker Series. My name is Silvia Smetana, and I'm the co-founder of Divershefy. And I'm your host today and for many sessions to come this week. Before I introduce the speakers, let me give you a couple of hints. We had a launch on October 1st. Maybe not everybody was part of that launch, so there is a possibility to get the recording for that. All registered participants will get a recording in the next couple of days of that original launch. If you want to know more about Divershefy, you can listen to that recording or also go to the website www.divershefy.club. So that is also where you can find out about membership and other things related to the club. So the topic for today's session is the future trends, a shaken world economy and opportunity for women. That is a question, not a statement. We will have about 1 hour for the panel discussion and about 20 minutes for a question and answer session. And I ask all the participants to please put the questions into the Q&A section and not in the chat. We will try to look through the chat as well, but we please ask you to put it in the Q&A section. This session will be recorded also and will be made available for registered participants afterwards. I will talk about other parts of the membership after the session. And let me get started with some of our speakers today. So let me introduce them quickly. I had been running this bios actually all the way through while we were waiting. But let me introduce Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti. He's a chartered accountant and a cost accountant. He's an internal auditor and a certified financial planner and fraud examiner. He's a board chairman, audit committee chair, and independent director at some of the country's most preeminent organizations. He's a well-known thought leader and he's a visionary for Indian economy and for the public policy. So this topic, I think, he's a very suitable candidate because the future trends, it's really all about vision for the future. So thank you, Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, for joining us today. So second speaker, we have Rajani Seshadri, I'm sorry. Problem with So Seshadri is co-founder of indePenn Connections, an organization committed to providing resources, support, and a helping hand to women who wish to return to work. So it's a very much related to what we are doing, just at a different level. As an executive coach, she has held over 60 senior managers. She has helped over 60 senior managers up in their leadership career. Over 3 decades, she has built a profitable business for TCS in Europe and globally for telecom companies. Welcome, Rajani.
Thank you,
I apologize for misspelling the name.
No problem.
Third speaker, we have Sridhar Divakaruni. Sridhar is Global Head of Business Development, Exinova, a Seattle-based company that manages an open innovation network of 12,000 innovators across the globe. He's also an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Connecticut, where he serves as an advisory board of several startups. Previously, he was at several companies, including IBM and United Technologies at the senior executive level. and has worked extensively in business. So welcome to this session today. I also want to introduce Revati Kastori, who is going to be our moderator for today. Thank you for joining, Revati. So Revati is founder of Lux Skills Job Academy, and she's also a board member at multiple organizations, listed companies. And she's also an advisory board member to Divershefy. So we're very happy that you're taking on the session today as moderator. So Revati,
thank you.
Take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, Sylvia. And hello to all the panelists, and welcome to all the folks joining us in this session. This is going to be a very exciting session, so stay glued. The topic itself, I'm sure, must have intrigued all of you. We're talking many things. We're saying what are future trends, a shaken world economy, and what are the opportunities for women. So stay glued, and I'm going to request Sridhar to open the session, and he will be telling us about the first part, which is future trends. So over to you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Revati, and thank you, Sylvia, for this wonderful opportunity. Given that we have about 50 minutes, and I think I'll probably take about 7 to 8 minutes just to talk about technologies in the context of macro trends, and I'll start by the saying that as Bill Gates has often said, as human beings we often tend to overestimate what we can do in the near term, whether it's 3 to 4 years, but we consistently underestimate what can be done by technology over a 10-year period and beyond. I mean, if you just look at your iPhone as an example, and how many industries have been disintermediated in unpredictable ways, it speaks to the power of technology. So I'd like to set the context, and actually the easiest part about this is that it's pretty easy to extrapolate what will be the emerging technologies that will shape our lives over the next 5 to 10 years. The much harder part is actually in the context of the macro trends, and especially with respect to governments and others and demography. How much of this change is actually going to bear upon us? And it's both an opportunity and a challenge. So I think I'll finish by bringing back to what does it mean in the context of working from home and some of those trends over here. So let's jump right in and speak about some of the emerging technologies. I think it's pretty safe to say that what people call artificial intelligence, as it evolves from machine learning to deep learning, is going to have a profound impact on our lives, just within the next 5 to 10 years. Many of you already know that computers can do a better job of recognizing faces today than humans can. And as you start moving from vision into language and into what's called reinforcement learning, there's some tremendous opportunities that is underpinned by technology. Some of you may know that the cost of actually training neural networks is dropping about 100x every 2 years. And so what this really means is that there's going to be a lot more machine intelligence that is brought to bear by humans, and how we shape that is going to be very important. Another evolving trend is about quantum computing. I'm not going to get too much into it, but fundamentally, the whole idea of using zeros and ones, to actually have multiple states is really going to transform how quickly we can solve some very difficult problems, whether it's from astronomy to being able to detect cancers and others. Everybody's heard about the impact that cloud computing is having. And as we move into the streaming world, not just video and audio and games, you're really going to start seeing an acceleration, as you're seeing with the pandemic now, in being able to have technologies that can easily choose to make us work from home if you want to. Whether it happens or not, we'll save that discussion for later. Another trend, of course, is with respect to automation. And everybody's heard about the Internet of Things. And as we move from 5G to 6G and higher states of Wi-Fi, the ability to move information rapidly in vast amounts is going to be of tremendous importance. And if you come from the industrial sector, the ability to have machines talking to machines, as it already happens today in the financial world, when that starts happening on factory floors and stuff, that is again going to change a lot of how we go to work and what we do for work. You're going to see a lot more of robots and even drones being used for e-commerce, as you start seeing. These are accelerating trends. And in that context, how we surveil, lands and, extract revenues, that's going to become an important trend. And speaking of drones, this whole world of autonomous vehicles, you're going to start seeing, not just trucks and buses, but cars and others essentially be able to drive themselves. And whether it actually happens in 10 years is really going to be more a function of urban planning and things of that nature. Speaking of vehicles, you're going to see the shift away from hydrocarbons more into electric and fuel cell vehicles. I'm just giving you a very fast landscape of several industries that are going to be touched over here. But you're also going to see the trend, to digital wallets as well as blockchain, just for provenance and, being able to move documents around in a very secure way. And I don't want to just keep this IT centric. You're actually going to see that in the biosciences, between next generation of DNA sequencing, whether it's liquid biopsies or tumor profiling, as well as, the ability to edit genes, combined with, artificial intelligence as a trifecta, those three are really going to help us accelerate the detection and possible cure of a lot of diseases. So just a huge whirlwind of technologies that I'm throwing at you. I know there are many, many more that I haven't talked about, but I think it's important to look at all of these technology trends in the context of the macro trends that are happening in the world. It's safe to predict that, 20 to 25 years from now, the US today is about 22% of the world's share of the economy, GDP. And that number is going to become a little smaller, not because the US is shrinking, but you're going to see China, become the number one over the next 20 to 30 years. Today, they're about 14% of the world's GDP. And behind that, is India that is fast approaching. India is about 3.3% of the world's economy today. But just based on demographic trends, they're going to become number 2 or number 3 in the next 20 to 30 years. And speaking of demography, you're really seeing a lot of societies that are aging across the world. You're actually seeing median ages climb, from the 30s into the 40s. But in India, the median age is right around 25. So it's a society and a country that is basically limitless and carrying, the next 20, 30 years of opportunity. But we should also speak in the context of immigration and immigration policies. The US today has about 330 million people, and it's expected to climb to about 400 million, but then there's going to be a decline thereafter. And I share all this because when we say how many of these technologies are going to happen and how is it going to impact employment, there are other factors that come to play. Are the world's countries going to remain democracies, or are more of them going to become authoritarian? Beyond the scope of the discussion today, but an important point to reflect on. And there's been a lot of discussion about acceptable levels of unemployment and speaking in terms of minimum wages and social safety nets. A lot of these are going to, again, impact how many of these technologies can actually come to fruition. So let me wrap up by saying, technology is a beautiful sword, but there are two sides to it. There's opportunity, but it also creates its own challenges. Many of us would not begrudge the fact that we can reach out to our classmates from 30 years ago in different countries, thanks to social networks. And yet you're seeing some of the challenges, that Facebook and Twitter have posed upon us as societies, right? So what do we think is going to happen in terms of working trends? My belief is it's going to be bimodal. There are some companies that are going to want you to still come to work because they believe that people are more creative when they work together. And there are some other companies, as you've seen, like Google and others, who don't necessarily believe you have to show up at work 5 days a week. So my belief is the office becomes more like a hub rather than a second home. And I'm already starting to see, since I live exactly halfway between Boston and New York City, that the real estate values are actually climbing quite rapidly where I am, because people are starting to move to where I am, a little more in the rural setting, and go to New York or Boston 1 or 2 days a week. And so that's going to have quite a profound impact with respect to commercial centers and real estate. The other point is, people tend to think of Zoom and Slack and others as recent technologies. They've been around for a decade. In fact, if you think about Adobe and PDF documents, it's going to celebrate its 30th anniversary next year. So technology will give us an opportunity to shape a lot of things, but what actually happens is largely going to depend upon government policies and, as societies, what we make of our governments. So let me stop there, Revati, since I've given you a lot of background and context that we can use for the rest of the panel session.
Revati, you're muted.
Thanks a lot, Sridhar. That was quite vast, and you've touched upon so many things. Let me just take a few questions right now to you before we move on to the next panelist, which are very specific to what you raised. Okay, the first, how will human interactions be amidst this intense technology? Will computers have more neural connections than humans? What about connections to emotions and the limbic system? Our learning is connected to emotional imprints. How will a computer do that?
Wow, that's lots of questions, not one. But I can certainly give you a little bit of my discussion, my thinking about this. In fact, one of our panelists is a big fan of Ray Kurzweil. I won't step into his domain here, but there's a lot of discussions in context about getting to the singularity. And, there are discussions about, as we think about the world that we have borrowed from our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their world is fundamentally going to be perceived in a very different way. There are going to be discussions, between our grandchildren about whether we're actually depriving them of intelligence because we're not giving them electrodes in their brains, that can actually enhance their ability to think and others. So these get into very different controversial topics, but I think as humans, we just need to allow ourselves to think about the fact that we are just a small cog in a very vast universe, that we can't necessarily predict what's going to happen. I think there are a lot of parents today that are distraught by the fact that their kids are hunched over their little phones, and that face-to-face communication is becoming a lost art. We've always cried about the bad sides of technology, but there are also good things that come out of it. And, I'm no prognosticator, and I'm not going to weigh my bets on a lot of these. I just think these are good questions that as societies we need to contemplate. And I hope, being of a positive nature, that we will always use technology as positives rather than negatives. There will be more negatives, but it's something that needs to be managed as societies.
Absolutely. And I'll just ask you a quick next question. This is on, you mentioned blockchain and moving documents, very, very important. So, just as in the case of social media, we've had lots of these issues and raised very well in this movie, The Social Dilemma. I'm sure many of you have read that, and there's a lot of active discussion going on that. But in blockchain and moving legal documents, how is the risk handled there?
Like anything else, we as citizens, care a lot about privacy. And there is always this question about, is sharing a good thing or a bad thing? And frankly, these are generational topics. As you know, millennials and Gen Z are much more comfortable with the idea of those things. But it's important to reinforce that blockchain actually enhances, security of documents and provenance and others, right? I don't want people to confuse blockchain with Bitcoin. Bitcoin happens to be a very small part just specific to currencies. But in general, having a root of trust, that is very secure, actually solidifies the ability to have contractual documents and others done in a way where you can go back and trace what the provenance of these documents are. So I don't see a conflict there at all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sridhar. So I'm going to come back to you later for one more round of questions. Meanwhile, my pleasure to hand over the mic to Shailesh. Shailesh, please go through and
Thank you.
share with us specifically the economy has been shattered post-COVID. Some countries seem to have managed better. There is a better sort of support from the government. Some are not so much. But everywhere, every country has faced the brunt of this. So can you share with us, what's the view from the boardroom about the economy? And how do you see this going forward?
Thank you very much, Revti.
Yeah.
So let me begin by thanking Sylvia and Divershefy for having got together this wonderful panel and giving me a chance to express some of my views. So let me respond, Revti, directly to your question. When the pandemic broke, it dawned upon all the world that this is a black swan event. Many boards were caught unaware. And so there was the rush to pick up 2 or 3 overbearing themes. So boards across the world picked up 3 themes very quickly. One is, let's try and cut costs, or let's make costs much more productive, which is the other way to look at costs. Second, let's get to cash, because if you have the cash, then you will be able to go past the difficult time and emerge stronger, perhaps. And third was safety. And so all of this translated into 3 very big forces getting unleashed. One is companies needed to innovate rapidly to enable work from home. Simply to get the information technology to work in a completely new environment was a huge challenge. There were some who had anticipated it. Some companies have the policy of bring your own device to work, but others have devices which they feel they should control and give access only in a limited way. So depending on where you came from, in terms of your confidentiality, you made your own choices, and you switched devices and you switched permissions in a way to make all of this happen. Then there was the need to innovate, to make sure that your business model doesn't get disrupted and that you actually become the disruptor if you possibly can. A big case in point is Reliance, which has been the recipient of the largest quantum of money that any corporation in Indian history has ever raised, any single corporation. It was purely because they repositioned. The third force that emerged was the need to collaborate. Very, very important in these times. And another force, which I think is very important for our discussion, is the force of responsible consumption and responsible capitalism. And I think it is useful for us to talk about these issues because those have become truly the board's big remits. The lens of the board has switched from pure making sure that the profit angle is supported to looking at being stewards of the environment, to being socially responsible, and to practice good governance. And let me tell you 2 or 3 examples and stories in each of these E, S, and G paradigms. Let's take the environment. This morning on a news feed called Future Loop, and I would sort of recommend it for everybody to use it. It just tells you the next things in the world that are going to emerge and happen. Innovative, converged technologies, exponential technologies that Sridhar mentioned are all converging and are creating 10x value from where we were earlier. That's the beauty of technology. When it converges and when it is exponential, it stops the linear thinking and puts you into a very different curve. So let's look at environmental stewardship. This morning, we saw the picture of a Tesla car, which is itself an electric car with a sunroof. So you can imagine that even an innovator like Tesla is moving rapidly to become a steward of the environment. Or take the example of Larsen and Toubro Finance's strategy on financing infrastructure. Within 9 years of its existence, it has become the largest financier of renewables in India by far. And that is the commitment to combining business with environmental stewardship. Let's take social responsibility. There's this wonderful, which is today active in Latin America, called New Story. And their story is amazing. What they're doing is they're printing 3D printed homes in very difficult seismic zones at a cost of less than 10,000 US dollars and giving it away free because they have been able to get good Samaritans from across the world to actually fund each of these homes. So their challenge is to figure out how to allocate those homes to the most eligible people. So they need to collaborate with governments, municipal corporations to choose these people. And what they are able to do at step 2 is to enable each one of these people to design their own homes. So for example, a single parent living with 1 or 2 children have very different needs from people who are living with old parents and who have maybe one of the members of the family on a wheelchair. So you can redesign and reprint the home to suit your individual circumstances. That is socially responsible. Now imagine there are more than a few billion unhoused human beings in the world who are either totally unhoused or are living in very difficult situations which are very dangerous. Now, when you want to scale it up to that level, you can see the business models that can converge to this reality of social responsibility. Take governance, the last one of the alphabets. The striking example that the world saw was how New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, managed her country. It was through communication, through great governance, transparency. She told the truth. She made sure that everybody got prepared. She was early to take action on stopping flights coming into New Zealand. She made sure that the balance between life and livelihoods was optimal. And she was totally transparent. As soon as a case happened, there was no attempt to hide. Everybody got a chance to get tested. The treatment, whatever was the protocols, all evolved. And therefore, they have been able to get back on their own 2 feet. So much fun. So boards across the world have to now look at what they are supposed to do. Their massive transformative purpose has to be defined through the lens of ESG. And what does ESG subsume? It subsumes the 17 SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And to report on them, what have they been able to bring into existence? Integrated reporting, the thinking that it's not just the financial capital which is important. It is your relationship capital, your human capital, your environmental capital. All of those make the difference. I'd like to leave 2 messages for all of you. In this new world, what you need to get to is become a value creation activist. That is the role that each one of us has to now adopt. And two, embrace diversity in a way that all kinds of voices, all kinds of diversity, inclusion comes onto the board. I'll stop there and invite questions and invite discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Shailesh. There was a lot you covered. Now, in fact, I had a thought which I wanted all of you to share your views, but I will seek your inputs right now. Post COVID, all of us have thoughts in terms of how do we want the world to be. Some people are feeling, let this just go away and let's go back to what was there earlier. But some people say that this has exposed all the rot that is there in our system, right? The kind of unemployment, the migrants, the lack of the healthcare being so fragile, not good support systems across, not having enough social security in many countries for people, etc., etc. There's a list is long. Women facing quite a big burden, working out of home and having so much of pressure. Now, in all this, I was going to ask all of you the question: if you look at the constituencies of, let's say, women, then you look at boards and corporates, and then government, what would be your input in terms of envisioning the new world, the new post-COVID world? If you could, pivot and say, we want to change this world. We don't want it to go back to how it was earlier. We've learned some lessons now. We know things were not so great. Is COVID just exposed all the weaknesses? So are you saying, Shailesh, that they focus on ESG, which has been there for quite some time, right?
Yeah.
But
at least 5 years.
It has been there for 5 years. And I'm so glad to hear you say that in many of the boards where you are participating, this is serious business. So do you think that, this would be taken seriously and sincerely as a mandate that all boards would start,
Absolutely.
putting their emotion and not just,
no question,
not just ticking the boxes, not ticking the boxes?
No, absolutely not. I think that whole idea is gone. There is no board which can get away with ticking the boxes. That's an obsolete notion. We should remove it from our discussion altogether. No board worth its salt will ever do only ticking the boxes. So let's look at what the boards want to do. They want to be sure that they are champions for clean air, clean water, making sure that people have food on their tables, making sure that, for example, in one of the boards that I sit on, our hospital was voluntarily handed over by us to become a COVID treatment hospital, voluntarily. And the government and municipal and the whole community was so thankful because this was the need of the hour. And we did that voluntarily. Now, this is the new aspect that you are going to see over. In another case, our entire town where we had one of our factories has been turned into a model of extraordinary good practices for the community. So the community took upon themselves to clean the streets, to grow plants, to have plants in every home. Waste was segregated. Vermiculture was established. There's a beautiful film on this. It is in Kerala called Madukkarai. And there's this little child who narrates the story of how her Madukkarai is heaven on earth. And that was all done through the efforts of one corporation. Now, this is the kind of new stuff that is happening, and it is serious. It's not lip service. I think we need to banish the notion because governments have failed to do it. It's the boards and the private sector which is going to do it.
I have another question. This is from Swati. Could you elaborate on the 3 ways for one to become a value creation activist?
Fabulous question, Swati. I think you need to demand value. There is often a dilemma as to, are you willing to give up your footprint, what you consider private to yourself, to get value? This is at the nub of the dilemma of being a value creation activist. Now, I'll tell you 3 things. No lending in India will be done 5 years from today, which is not data led. So if I don't know everything about your financial footprint and your anticipated financial behavior, I'm not going to lend you money. 2, no investor from the world in 5 years' time is going to put money where ESG compliant company does not exist. Not only itself, but through its entire value chain. 3, you will not have unsafe environments which will be tolerated. People simply won't come to work in unsafe environments. So you better make it. So this is the value activism that you need to ask for, and you'll get it. Make sure that these legitimate voices are there. None of us want non-performing assets. None of us want failures in our financial system. What's the way to prevent it? That you stop lending. Early warning signals should be heeded. Stop the rot when it is possible to stop it. That is why you need to be totally a value creation activist.
Thanks a lot, Shailesh. There are lots more questions, but we'll come back to them later. I'll now hand over the mic to Rajani. Rajani Seshadri, I want you to talk about, in the current scenario, what are the opportunities for women world over? There are some scary reports, especially coming in from the United States, that, women who have now faced such a big burden when they are doing work from home, they have to handle the kids, they have to take care of putting food on the table, they have to take care of the elderly and the aged at home, and then manage their own jobs. They have such a lot of stress that there is increasing talk that they want to opt out, a trend which is a reverse. For so many years, it has been moving up, 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 and suddenly we're saying women want to drop out. So this is really scary. We'd love to hear from you who are close to this sector. Tell us more about it. Over to you, Rajani.
Thank you, Rekti. So I'm going to confine my remarks today to women, the challenges that they're facing, and what I believe we should be able to do about it in the short term and in the medium term. Long term, I will leave to Sridhar's predictions on technology trends. So, all the things that you talked about, right? The McKinsey report about the burden of care. Professional women have always borne the double burden of family and career. Pre-COVID, during COVID, and unless we make a very conscious and concerted effort to change, they're going to continue to bear the burden even after COVID, after the return to normalcy. And how do I define normalcy? I'm calling it schools open, childcare centers open, paid household help return to work, elder care responsibilities are shared with healthcare providers who are no longer overwhelmed by COVID. So, home nursing care, all of that is back. Even after that, it's not that the double burden that women face is going to go away. So let us talk about women who are our target audience, right? 15 plus years. They're in middle management or senior management. They're knowledge workers. They have responsibilities in their companies. So I'll just take a minute to kind of sketch their lives for you. they have a fair degree of responsibility at work, even pre-COVID, right? At work. They probably worked at least 45 to 50 hours a week. This would not have changed. This has not changed. They had paid household help, at least in India and in other parts of the world as well, to help with maybe cooking, cleaning, childcare. This has most definitely changed because many of these help have gone back to their hometowns. Uh, and in India, at least, many of these housing complexes, societies, apartments, gated communities are not allowing people from outside to enter. So, no help. The volume of work has not changed. No help at home. Children who probably between the ages of 8 and 18, I'm taking a very broad sweep, right, are now confined to the home with classes being held online. Many schools and colleges insist that one parent monitor the child's classes because of some fairly horrendous stories that are floating around. Uh, these children are at home 24/7, no school, no after school activities, no sports, no interaction with friends. So the entire care responsibility rests with primarily with the women. So cooking, cleaning, children's classes, keeping children entertained, and in many countries like ours, caring for older family members, along with all the professional commitments. That's what is in this woman's plate. Added to this, her supervisor believes that she must now be more available because after all, she's working from home. So those 2 hours that she spent commuting, they've been saved. So, more availability is expected. Now, are we really surprised that many of these women may opt out? Physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion, it's the norm today for every woman. So, if we want women, especially in the middle and senior management, to not drop out, what can be done? So, uh, my first solution, which I call the short term solution, bring men as partners, peers, and bosses into the conversation. We talk about parental leave being shared. Now, taking care of an infant, a newborn, when you're on leave is not such a big thing. What is really important is about sharing the caregiving on a daily, hourly basis while taking responsibility for ownership, not just responsibility, ownership for deliverables at work. So the care work has to be shared, ideally equally. As peers and bosses, men must accept that employees cannot work in an interrupt-driven mode, which we may do in a traditional office environment. I come over, I knock on your cubicle wall, and I say, hey, can I talk for just 1 minute? And all of us have experienced that, right? Given the increased family responsibilities, a well-planned schedule of meetings confined to a part of the workday shows respect for the employee's situation. And this also allows partners to cover for each other for caregiving. So if the man is constantly on video calls, and I can't tell you how many stories I've read of this nature in the last few months. He's always on a video call, so I have to take care of everything. If the man is constantly on video calls, who's doing the caregiving? It's the woman. Whereas if you say that, okay, morning you have call time, evening, afternoons, I manage my calls, and can be each of us uh, take care of the children, the home, the guy who rings the doorbell, the contactless delivery, all of that, maybe some sweeping, maybe some cleaning, all of that can be done by the other partner for part of the half day. Anyway, knowledge workers benefit from thinking time, where you're not constantly interrupted by phone calls, emails, instant messages, expected to respond instantaneously. That thinking time benefits deep work. It facilitates deep work. So let's make our days a little better planned and organized, better scheduled. I think we will uh, make everyone feel a lot more relaxed. I want to tell a story here. Matt Mullenweg, the founder of Automatic, the company that owns WordPress, talks about 5 levels of autonomy in distributed teams. So in Automatic, 1,276 employees, 76 countries, and they speak 95 different languages. Imagine the number of time zones. So, what Automatic has done is they don't call it remote offices because remote implies that there is a center. So it's distributed teams. So he says there are 5 levels of autonomy, like autonomous cars, the same way. At level 0, it's a job that you can't do unless you're present. So think about a shop floor worker, think about a barista. You have to be there to make it happen. And from there, at level 1, whatever you're doing in the office, you're doing at home. There are some things that you can do at home from home, some you can't do, which is how most of us were working before March. Since March, we've become a little more sophisticated. Most of the tools are accessible uh, from home, remotely, Zoom calls, but we've just done a lift and shift. And those of you who are familiar with the BPO ITES industry will recognize that phrase, lift and shift. We've just taken the processes that we used in the office and we put them online. So we have just as many meetings, we have just as many interrupts. We just use Zoom instead of all of us walking into a conference room. At level 3, you become a little more asynchronous. Uh, you think about how do you replace meetings? Can many of these things be done over Slack? Can we use email better? Can we use shared documents better, Google Docs, right? All of these become your company's way of work. But the real uh, benefits start to kick in when you're at level 4. Things go truly asynchronous, right? Uh, you evaluate people on the work that they've done, the outcome, not how long they took, when did they show up, are they at work for 12 hours, all of that, right? Decision making slows down, but it's better thought out decisions. Employees have dedicated home office setups because that is the way they work. So if we can move to that, if we can design our organization design, if we can do it ground up, not just move the physical stuff, not just lift and shift the physical stuff onto an online plan. Let us go to level 4 of Automatic. You also asked me to speak about whether this can be an opportunity for women. My answer is yes, absolutely. There are lots of industries, Sridhar talked about some of them, which are future oriented. Shailesh talked about some of them, uh, whether it is in artificial intelligence, digital content creation, edutech, online gaming, product management, HR, personal finance. There's so many things that can be done, continue to be done online. But the challenge, I believe, is that many of us at the 15-year point become managers of people. And we start to believe that our job is to do work allocation and tracking, monitoring other people's work. We tend to become aggregators of people's work. If we are not subject matter experts in something, which is what we want to be subject matter experts in. If we are not subject matter experts, we are likely to become redundant. So I think as a woman, I would love to be able to pivot my career. I have to learn continuously. There may be certifications involved, there may not be certifications involved. It depends on how you choose to learn as an individual. But continuous learning in today's knowledge economy, I think there is no excuse for not doing it, right? There's enough content available for each of us to learn for several lifetimes. So, but now think about it. Where will a woman who's already overwhelmed find the time to learn a new area? Because this is thinking time. This is not something that you can do while you're cooking, while you're cleaning, while you're watching your child attend a class. This requires concentration, it requires focused attention. So, how is she going to find the time to learn something new? And if we don't start sharing the burden of care much better, we're going to lose women not only to her family responsibilities, but also to a widening skills gap. Coming to women getting onto boards, I believe that a line rule, several line rules are essential for a woman to feel comfortable and to make her presence felt, to make her voice heard on a board. There's a power of not one, right? At least two women on a board. But whether it is one or two, I must feel comfortable in understanding uh, the ability to read financial statements, the ability to understand technology, the ability to understand strategy. All of that comes from line roles that I do as part of my senior management career. And only then will I volunteer to be on boards. So we talked about women, the people who are supporting women leaders today. So please encourage your women leaders to take up line rules and learn on the job so that they build the confidence that they can contribute on a board and that they will be successful on a board. And lastly, while we're waiting to reopen, go back to our pre-COVID life, let's also redesign, ramp up, and professionalize our care economy. So Scandinavian countries have a great blueprint. How do you provide childcare centers, elder care centers, all of that, right? Technology solutions allow monitoring of health and well-being of children or elders, make it more comfortable for people to use those facilities. And obviously, there'll be ripple effects. You will employ far more women as caregivers. The Anganwadi uh, scheme shows us how that can happen. Um, and governments can help set national standards and certifications for paid caregivers and care centers at different levels. So the most affordable to the maybe luxurious even care, but care centers that are digitally enabled, certified, and professional, professionally run. So I'm going to stop here and say that if we want our women to take on senior management roles, leadership roles, and board roles, uh, we as families have a large role to play. And we as company owners, company leaders, have a very big role to play to make sure that we are truly supportive. 6 months maternity is a drop in the bucket, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Rajani. I have one quick question for you. Cheers for laying out the daily attention conflicts that women face during this pandemic. Would you think men at work would look at the issues of women colleagues and allow for flexible solutions on a conference call? Or would it actually add to the bias, drowning out opportunities of progress for women?
You know, if we leave it as it is today, then the bias is going to be the overruling emotion. Right? Why do I have to put up with this? But if companies can figure out what is performance criteria, is it fair to expect employees at this time to deliver to the old expectations, pre-March expectations, given that the market is difficult, given that the economy is tanked, given all that, childcare, home, all that? Is it fair to hold them to the same targets? Is it fair to hold them to the same performance criteria? It is not enough to say, I will do unconscious bias training, and oh, by the way, we covered everybody in the company. We've done unconscious bias training. What does it really mean? What are the KPIs? What are you going to measure? What are you going to, how are you going to motivate your managers, supervisors, and leaders to say, let me be fair in spirit, not to the letter? Can we say, if you're going to promote two men, where are the two women you're promoting? I come from the IT industry. I worked in TCS for 26 years. When I joined TCS, we were 10% women. When I left TCS, 50% of the freshers class was women. So we've come a long way, right, in 30 years. However, the pipeline is very, very, very leaky. And unless we mandate, unless we set performance criteria for our leadership, that right from the entry point to the senior-most level, they are responsible for making sure that the pipeline doesn't leak unduly and doesn't leak because of biases. Right? So whatever training we need to build, whatever processes, policies, practices we need to build. It's not an easy job, right? It's an ongoing day-to-day battle.
Right.
But if we
Rajani,
want parity, that's what we'll have to do. Yeah.
Thanks. Rajani, so there's a second part which you actually touched in your presentation, which is somewhat some part of the answer to my question on if women as a constituency were to reimagine and look at pivoting this world and solving all the problems which have only got exacerbated during this COVID and how they are impacted. So you touched upon some things like, the government, corporations taking the lead in terms of childcare, having some kind of skilling center so that they could retain and become subject matter experts. There were 3-4 other points. Anything more you'd like to touch upon in terms of a wish list? I think whether it's Zurich or in Austria or in India, absolutely, or even in the United States is actually much worse. Support for childcare and all very, very pathetic. So it's really you manage on your own kind of thing all the time, right?
So that's my question, right? At least in India, most families are two-parent families, right? 80-90%. I don't know the current statistics, but most families are two-parent families. Why is the mother responsible for all childcare when the child has two parents? So what can we do about education, through education, that says it is a parental responsibility, not a maternal responsibility? What can the government do, supported by companies, to say, here are childcare centers that are, there are standards. Let's say an ISO, just as a ISO standard for childcare centers. There's a parent tier, there's a teacher to student ratio, there's a certain technology, right? So therefore, I feel comfortable leaving my 2-year-old or 3-year-old in a place like that. And at any point during the day, I can turn on some technology, maybe a tracking app. Shailesh would like that. A chip embedded in the child, perhaps, or a camera, which allows me to monitor my child's well being. And as parents, we stagger our routines so that we can both provide childcare at some point in time. So the individual, the family, the company, and the government has to come together so that childcare and elder care, at least, are seen as responsibilities that each one of these entities can play a role in.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Revati, one more thing is that it is motherhood a punishment for women?
It's a celebration.
That's what we
I-
say. I don't know if we're fooling ourselves. Because I was reading this McKinsey article that said most women who have risen in their careers have chosen to not have children.
Maybe we should have a poll and check with the ladies.
Yeah, please do.
So that's a shout out to Sylvia. Do a little survey. So I feel that, I'm just going to come back to that point. But meanwhile, there are a lot of people who've taken umbrage that I haven't asked Sridhar and Shailesh this question. So Sridhar and Shailesh, please answer this question. What is the opportunity for women as you see going forward? Shailesh, first to you. You're on mute.
My sense is that the opportunity is to claim the rightful place that women deserve.
Wonderful.
On boards, at the top echelons of companies, and we are doing a lot in this area. I think it's like the tip of the iceberg. What is seen is only the top. The effort that is being made is immense. And I can see it in my own home. I live with 3 generations, my son and my grandchildren. And I'm seeing how this is changing. Some of the issues that Rajani raised. For example, getting the boys into the kitchen is something that we are encouraging because it's not natural to expect that it's only the woman of the house who will cook the food and put it on the table. So in our home, there's a whole lot of involvement of both genders in even the task of putting the food on the table or in the task of ordering the contactless delivery, which again Rajni talked about. So I think there is this desire to share and not consider like a mindset. So what corporate India is trying to do is to switch mindsets. And I can go through the 6 ways in which mindsets are being changed, from scarcity to abundance, from linear thinking to circular thinking, from entitled behavior to gratitude, from getting to giving, from completely routinized wanting to do routine work to wanting to do only innovative work, and from the winner takes all mentality to the mentality of inclusiveness. So this is the mindset change that we at boards and in companies that we have influence over are trying to accomplish, so that then it truly becomes gender neutral. The new mindsets that I'm talking about are completely gender neutral and they give the same opportunity. The key thing is to give the same opportunity. Once you do that, then you make big, like the ones that Rajani mentioned. TCS has more women today than men in the workforce. And I think that's phenomenal.
Thank you so much, Shailesh. That fills me with optimism. Sridhar, your turn to answer that.
Sure. Great conversation here. To me, it's very simple. A lot of the technology trends that I spoke about actually point to a world where there is less emphasis on brawn and more emphasis on brain. And I'll leave you with a simple data point that we've already referenced. But today, there are more girls, I should say women, who are actually graduating with 4-year degrees than men in the United States. Okay, and that may surprise a few people. So the point here being that the world is moving to one where if brain is recognized more, and the people who are graduating, assuming that they have the brains and the right intellect, it's really getting to be a woman's world, right? And I'll bring up one more point here, which I think is important. We here on this webinar are a very self-selected group of professionals, largely IT and others, right? We don't necessarily speak for the broader range of the population. And I bring this up because, as a part of my work, as Sylvia introduced me, I help manage a network of 12,000 innovators all around the world. And what I actually see is there's a real generational gap and outlook where when I speak to people in the 20s and 30s, I see both men and women, bringing their little kids with diapers, taking calls, we have a blind spot here. We still continue to believe that somehow it is the woman's role. I actually don't see that among the youngsters, as I look at my nephews and nieces and stuff. And this may be a little controversial, but I sense that when you're in your late 40s and 50s and 60s, that's where there is this mantle of, being the caregiver to older, people, in addition to being the primary caregiver in a family. I actually, perhaps this is what gives me a very positive outlook. I don't see a lot of, men in their 20s and 30s just somehow assuming that it's the woman's job. At least that's a perception that I see in the United States and in many countries across the world. But I'll leave it there for now and, open the floor to questions.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions which have been answered, but some are not yet answered. Okay, let me just take some.
So, Revati, I have a poll ready if you want to use one. Is having children holding women back? Do you want to use that?
Where is that?
I can launch it if you want me to.
Okay, sure.
Okay, let's have a question for the audience. So question is having children holding women back? Yes, but we still need to have kids. Yes, I chose not to.
I want to take part in the poll.
Yes. I chose not to have kids because I want a career. No, children are not the problem, or no, but it's a complex issue. So I have about 44% voted so far. Men should also vote, I think, and see
everybody can
their
vote.
perspective. Okay, so we have 84% voted. So I think we can probably close. So the results, interesting. So it's basically a complex issue. 43% say it's a complex issue and 29% say it's not the problem. So majority basically thinks that it's not really, having children or not having children is not the main issue. So it's more complex than that, and I would agree with that.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's a question also of semantics and phrasing of the question. Is it the support system inadequate, right? The support system is inadequate is 100% yes, across the board, right? I don't think anywhere in the world there is a adequate support system. It is something that you keep personally working out for yourselves. So lots more to go. Okay, let me get back to some of the other questions. Okay, converging innovation and social responsibility is an exciting idea. This question is for Shailesh. But didn't we have the same epiphany after the crash of 2008? Nothing revolutionary happened then. Why do you think it'll be different this time?
It is very different this time because the world has traveled a huge distance since 2008. You need to think of two big ideas. One is, or actually three big ideas. One is that the stock of wealth in the world has gone so high that the enjoyment from that stock is possible to make good living and affordable living, democratized living, ubiquitous. So that has happened. The world has built up that stock. The flow has also been remarkable, but that has changed. And it has changed because of the geopolitics of US China, the geopolitics of stopping free trade, and all of that. But the realization, which was actually brought to the world's attention last year at the business conference held in August last year, where the leading businesses of the world went and into a room and came out saying that purpose should drive stakeholder satisfaction. That has made an immense impact. The 17 SDGs were articulated in 2015. Since 2015 to today, the 5-year period in which people have tried to or attempted to actually implement them, there has been immense change. And what technology has done is it has permitted things to become democratized. To me, that is why technology is so critical, and converging emerging technologies are so important because they deliver the democratized value. I gave you the example of a $10,000 home, which is a pakka home with a shower, with a toilet, with everything designed to suit. Now that is truly the delivery of technology. And the home is built in 50 hours, mind you. So this is revolutionary democratization led by technology. In healthcare, the same thing has happened. Today, you can get a prescription for diet supplements based on a complete examination of the entire inner chemistry of your body. So you get a personalized pill, which will enable you to supplement what you're eating today on a regular basis. And health care will actually happen. Today, the entire world is focused on sick care. We have been thinking only of making sure that when people fall sick, we must have enough hospital rooms to take care of them. The real care has to be taken at home. And that is what technology is going to enable through the kind of processes that are being developed. So I'm so clear that it's a very different world we are living in. 2008 to 15 was a period of recovery and re-establishment. 15 to 20 was a period of great abundance. 20 gave us a chance to halt and take a reboot, take a reset. And now we are on that path where the old normal will not return. And we will move into a completely new way of dealing with the issue.
Thanks, Shailesh. Question here for Sridhar. There are two questions which I'm going to try and combine. One is that with so much of technology, will this human touch go away? And we feel a little insecure with that human touch. Will the flexibility of what we do and achieve get reduced? These are two concerns. Would you like to take that?
Sure. I'm not quite sure I understand the second question, but look, technology is just a tool. How we choose to use it is still a human imperative, right? So there's some people who use social media and smartphones as a way to hide away because they're essentially introverted. And some others use this as an opportunity to reach out, further all across the globe. So that's exactly what I mean by a double-edged sword, right? So our responsibilities as parents and grandparents does not go away. We still have to play the role of shaping technology, and not just as parents, but even as executive officers in companies, right? So that's just something that we have to do as a society.
Okay, thank you. Rajani, are leaders thinking about diversity and inclusivity in clinical trials as well, as we see research and trial outcomes on the Western world have missed out. They haven't included Hispanic, Black, Brown, Asian, etc. Just a simple example of benchmarking cholesterol levels in a human body. What do you say to that?
Not my area of expertise. I think
Okay.
Sridhar or Shailesh might be much better equipped to handle those.
I think there are a
Well,
lot of studies
I'll
going
take
on.
a
Sure, go ahead.
no, I'll get it because the key thing about fighting COVID is not the virus. The key thing is us. Whether we can change the air we breathe in, the water we drink. Can it be more alkaline? Can the air we breathe be cleaner? Can we have plants in our homes at a very basic level? Two, it's all about immunity. It's about whether we can make sure that, after we took our first shots or gave our children or grand first shots when they were below 8 years old, we just forgot about immunity. Actually, the human race needs immunity on a regular, continuous basis. And that has become the challenge. So it's very critical that we shift the focus of healthcare and care of our environment to a holistic way of thinking about how do we today to this particular company that it's called Viome. It's very interesting. You can go to it and look at it. The entire human genome and your entire bio tech inside you can be measured, and you get absolutely tailor-made treatment. That's the future.
Shailesh, I have two questions for you. One is the ESG focus. Does it require collaboration across countries? And how do you think that's going to happen now, given the current political climate? Similarly, what about the competition between federal states, whether in US or India? That's one. And another, which is little related, again, I will draw your... Yeah, the other is that, yes, you mentioned that there's been a dramatic increase in wealth 2008 till now. But you see the Gini coefficient is actually become much worse, basically making it a much more polarized elitist world. So can you take these two up?
I'll take the last question first. Just as this Gini coefficient has gone up, giving in the world has gone up to unprecedented levels. So, we should not look at it from only one single viewpoint. Today, Feeney, the person who actually started General Atlantic Partners, is a pauper. He has actually given away, he defined it that during my lifetime, I will come down to zero so that when I die, my burial will happen with borrowed money. He went to that extent and he has now done it. Bill Gates and all of them are working towards far more giving. So we need to take this holistic view before but I'm a great believer in reducing inequality. And I think, again, it's technology which will bring that about. On the question of collaboration, the answer is a very resounding yes. You see, the SDGs were developed by 193 nations of the world coming together. 15 eminent persons or 17 eminent persons from all over the world came and gave us these 17 SDGs. And they gave us a 30-year time frame. So therefore, what has happened is that 10,000 companies have started putting out their integrated report from all over the world. And that number is growing exponentially. So therefore, the chance that we will get on to getting something valuable and visible done has improved dramatically because collaboration shall happen. We have, despite everything else, we have now realized, particularly post-COVID, that collaboration is critical.
Okay, great. So we're coming to the end, and I've seen most of the questions. We may not be able to do justice to all of them. So I want you all to give some final comments on opportunities for women in this current scenario and how the future looks for women. Sridhar?
Sure. Look, I've heard a lot of conversation today about, women are constantly swimming against the current. and the world is becoming harder and harder, with more responsibility. Let me just share something personal over here, because that's partly why I'm involved with Sylvia and this Divershefy, right? I'm the 10th of 11 children. I have 6 brothers and 4 sisters. And, we were all born and raised largely in the 40s and the 60s. I lost my dad when I was 6 years old. And so it's a remarkable testimony to the fact that my mother raised that many kids. And today we are essentially 8 engineers, 2 physicians and 1 computer scientist. So this notion of difficulty has to be put in context. My mom never had this technology. She never had a refrigerator till she was in her in the 1970s, having to cook 3 meals a day and stuff. And yes, she was supported by my father in terms of, economic support, but she was largely the person who ran the show. But it's not lost upon me that my sisters, had a very difficult time, coping through the 70s and 80s to really break a lot of barriers. And so everything needs to be put in context. I look at my nieces today, they all greatly, have done remarkably well, but they understand the context of, there's a lot more opportunity now than what their mothers ever faced, right? I put this in the context and with one parting thought, right? There's a lot of talk about mandating and demanding equality, which is important. But as Shailesh said, this is about value creation and creating a level playing field. And it's important that as mothers, we have to remember we have both sons and daughters. And I'll give you one point for contemplation. I have a number of clients today in companies where they're mandating that a lot of the executive roles have to go to women. And that's important. But it's coming at a price where it's having a backlash effect, where there are a lot of people actually saying, wait a minute, you became an executive only because you're a woman. And actually, the people that's really hurting are the women itself, because they are completely deserving of these good roles, but it almost comes across like you are a quota. So I say this because we have both boys and girls, and it's important that what we're all asking for is a fair system. We're not commanding, a disproportionate share. And I think this needs to be kept in the context of the discussions that we're having over here. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you,
I have
Sridhar.
to say only one sentence. Dream the dream that you want to dream, and the world will make its path to make it happen.
Wonderful.
Don't worry at all.
Correct.
Thank you. Rajani?
Hey, I believe that all of us make our choices, and there are consequences for those choices. The question is, how can I make those choices more equitable for men and women at every level through their careers? And that's really something that, as I said before, the multiple entities, the individual, the families, society, companies, governments, all have a role to play. And I'm very encouraged by what I do see companies doing. And obviously, I would like to for more to be done so that we are not talking about 30% women participation, we're talking about 50%.
Thank you, Rajni. So, as history has shown, choices made during crisis can shape the world for decades to come. So, what's going to be important is collective action on all our parts, as individuals, as board members, as leaders, to build economies and to build society where it's more inclusive, where there is growth, prosperity for all, and where women are respected and recognized. Thank you so much, all the panelists, for sharing your thoughts and your answers to all those questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions, but I think we got the gist of it, most of the questions. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Revati. Thank you to the panelists for such an interesting discussion. And I would like to actually go on with it a lot more. because I think there's so many more questions, and I also feel this topic needs a lot more attention, actually. But thank you for today. Thank you for joining. And tomorrow's topic will be women on corporate boards. It's not just about the numbers. So we are specifically talking about women on boards. And our speakers will be Vichaya Sampath. She's a lawyer and also on many public boards in India. Prakash Apte, who is the chairperson of the Kodak Mahindra Bank and a non-executive chairman of Syngenta. And Madhu Raganathan. She's an EVP and Chief Financial Officer of OpenText, and she's also board member at Akamai Technologies. So these three speakers will be with us tomorrow at the same time as today. We hope this session has inspired you to maybe consider becoming a member of the Divershefy Club. We have an individual membership as well as a corporate membership. And you can find out more about this on www.divershefy.club. You can also attend a masterclass for free. The first one that we are offering is for all participants of this launch week for free. And you can get to this class about emotional intelligence on October 20th by sending us an email to info@divershefy.com, info@divershefy.com, with the subject line masterclass and your LinkedIn profile and your WhatsApp number, so we can send you the registration link. Also, I wanted to quickly let you know, starting in November, we will have 3 sessions every month. The first session is always at the first of the month with a new feature of the Divershefy Club, as well as you can engage with the founding members of the Divershefy Club directly. This is free of cost and it's open to the public. The second one is on the 10th of each month. We have a masterclass that is held only accessible to the members, except for the very first one of October 20th. That is the one you can sign up for. On 20th of each month, we will have a fireside chat or a panel discussion, similar like we had today, which will be free for all members and is paid access to the public. We will have a calendar ready by October 11th for the rest of the year and for the first quarter of next year on the topics that we will discuss in the master classes and in the fireside chat and panel discussions. So please do join us tomorrow at Women on Corporate Boards. It's not just about the numbers. Thank you so much, everybody. And good night in Asia, good evening in Europe and Middle East, and good morning, America.